Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, now perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thanks for joining us today. I'll be discussing the Biometic Solution and what the path forward is in terms of ultrasound simulation and how we can really empower instructors to utilize biomedics, not as a simulator as it currently sits today, but as an ecosystem where you're able to access your content anywhere in the world, and you are able to reach as many trainees, whether they're training at their house or in the simulation center, and how it all comes together. So what the future of ultrasound simulation really looks like. So currently, biomedics is utilized in two different arenas. One is hospitals and one is academia. So in hospitals, we target a few specialties in terms of where ultrasound is very, very prevalent in terms of emergency medicine for point of care ultrasound, cardiac anesthesiology and ICU under that umbrella, and obstetrics and gynecology. On the academia side, it has so many features, thousands of features to really simplify ultrasound and how ultrasound really varies from CT or MR. But you have, as a professional, you have to really understand the basics of how a 3D structure is displayed in a 2D cut plane, and how we have thousands of features that really simplify this process, so you can build a spatial understanding of each and every single artifact as you're scanning and what it looks like. On the academia side, on early professionals such as sonography programs and medical schools, that is where biomedics is utilized in the academia. Biomedics is different from most patient simulators in the sense that they don't necessarily live in a simulation center. Biomedics is portable. There's a laptop, a mannequin, and handheld probes. But what you can do is now, with the power of what we've recently launched, you can unplug the mannequin and take the biomedics anywhere, just as you would with your laptop. And there are on-screen prompts, which I'll give a demonstration of, which enable you to practice right next to the patient. So we've had instances, especially internationally, where a clinical expert has brought his trainees on next to a patient, and side by side, they're doing compare and contrast to showcase what it looks like on a human and next to how it's presented in a simulation. And today we will be really focusing on the evolution of biomedics and what's next in terms of what we are working on and what the next few years look like. When we introduced biomedics, the beauty of biomedics was being able to present two different, one is an animated image, one is a cardiac, in this case, a cardiac image, where you are seeing a side-by-side representation of when I manipulate the probe, when I do certain manipulations, what my correlating behavior is of the echo image and on a 3D animated image. On the other end, as we move to a more portable setup, we introduced a lot of new features that enabled users to be able to understand anatomy. As you move your mouse, you're able, and as you're scanning, you're able to utilize, okay, that's the right ventricle. You're able to, like a piece of an onion, you're able to peel back layers. Okay, what does bone look like under ultrasound? Let me remove it, let me turn it back on. So we added thousands of features that really simplified education in that perspective. And then where we are headed next is the topic of my lecture today. So instead of simulator, which sits in a simulation lab, dependent on faculty or an educator to be able to be utilized as a tool, which it is today. Meaning that if you have the simulator, there are only a handful of things, any simulator in the world, that a trainee can do by themselves. But can we turn the simulator into such a tool that the instructor can just embed their knowledge in the machine, and then trainees can practice at home or practice in the simulation center with hands-on and be able to utilize it so the simulator is never static or never not being used by trainees. And could we enable instructors and trainees to be not dependent on one another, meaning that trainees can practice without the instructor present. And last but not least, in addition to this, can we build features that still provide the same level of feedback that you would get in an on-site education with an instructor and the trainee present? So I really like to share this slide to explain who, what, where, when, why. So if we take a step back, ultrasound in general, especially with COVID, has accelerated so fast. Meaning that I use the analogy AAA. Ultrasound is now accessible in clinically. You have handheld ultrasound systems, and ultrasound systems in general have become a lot more affordable. So it's accessible because it's a lot more affordable and it's being utilized. There's a lot of research and guidelines in terms of how to do procedural guidance as well as diagnostic. So instead of traditionally being used in one or two specialties, now it's being used everywhere across. Anybody that knows how to utilize ultrasound utilizes it in their daily clinical practice. But the bottleneck that's holding ultrasound back is adoptability, meaning that because technology has become cheaper, that's not the bottleneck, and it's affordable. But the adoptability factor is really holding back ultrasound because it is a very complex subject matter to understand. Meaning that if I'm doing a specific scan and I actually have lung in the way, bones in the way, all these different artifacts, and I have to really visualize as I manipulate the probe how those artifacts behave and be able to then span and sweep the entire probe and mentally stitch together, okay, this is the right ventricle and this is how much I have to scan to be able to capture the entire right ventricle. And so that's just one example, but thoroughly. So how do we address that adaptability? That adaptability is dependent, if we take a second step further down, that adaptability bottleneck is because there are few people internationally and everywhere globally in the world that really understand ultrasound and can take ultrasound and disseminate that knowledge to as many trainees as possible. Typically in the US here, you have one educator that can host on a weekend or in a classroom, maybe 5 to 7 trainees at one time with the simulator. But how do you increase that ratio so that one subject matter expert can reach as many people across the world as possible because they only have a certain limit of time. So can we improve their efficiency so they can reach as many people as possible so anybody can master ultrasound as long as they have time? So the thing, some of the components that I will present today is a platform that we have created, which really target the instructor to be able to download their mind or upload their mind into the ultrasound simulator. Any questions before I get to the next step? Okay. So let's talk about, we talked about in a traditional sense how ultrasound education and where the simulator was used. So in this chart, what I'll showcase is, think of this child or this platform as clinical ultrasound simulation labs or on-site training. You have an instructor who uses the simulator and trainees are at the same time at the same place. Now, if an instructor has time during their day or during their week, they will host as many different trainees to be able to do on-site workshops. And once these trainees go, they go to the next step. That instructor now has to redo for a new batch of trainees. But ultrasound, what this instructor does in person is, as they scan, they're looking at the screen and showcasing, okay, this manipulation does this. This is the point of our interest. Let me load a different pathology. This is what normal person looks like. This is what an abnormal pathology looks like. And it's constant process of hosting on-site lectures. But what we are proposing is you take the simulator and the same instructor is not hosting an in-person workshop. They can. We will give that full flexibility because any technology adoption takes time. So that we understand that people and the processes have already been implemented and that will take some time to change. An instructor can bring that simulator anywhere in the world, anywhere with them, at home or in the simulation center without trainees present. And we have created a platform with a click of a button, they can start recording and editing lectures directly into the simulator. Meaning that I'm going to create my own page. Think of this as YouTube for ultrasound, but it's very thoroughly organized and is based on your specific institution guidelines. So you can have 5 or 6 or 10 instructors from your institution be able to collaborate. I log in and I start talking about basics of ultrasound or something very, very advanced. Transgastric abdominal ultrasound. I can give 2-minute lectures up to 2-hour lectures if I like, and my content gets saved. Now, I can take that content and I can bring that into my learning management system. So most institutions have a LMS. So I can take content, the simulator directly has a direct access to 99% of the LMS, because there's many different ones around the world. I can bring that content into my LMS and I can assign it to my trainees. My trainees can now watch that content at home, meaning on my iPad or iPhone. I am watching that entire lecture as I would watch it on screen. And then I can schedule time with the simulator, which sits in a simulation center, to practice what we call end of chapter activities or assessments, to ensure that I get my hands-on practice as well. So the analogy that I will use is, think of it as a textbook. Traditionally, ultrasound, the first way I learned ultrasound and how it's still taught today, before I go on site on a lecture, I'm reading a few chapters on any different topic. So a textbook has a few components. It has chapters where there's textual information, such as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, basics of ultrasound, what artifacts look like, and many, many different topics. And then every chapter has what we call end of chapter assessment, right? So chapter 1 will have 10 to 15 questions, which test the reader, the reader who's reading the textbook, their ability to be able to, did they assess this information? So the author has put in about 10 to 15 questions, which are multiple choice or just general questions that test that the reader retained this information. And then at the end of the textbook is also what we call, I guess what we call is, in the US, we call an index or appendix, where I can actually look up, I go in and I say, okay, parasternal long axis view. Where do I find that word parasternal long axis view in the textbook? Is this page? I can go to that page and read up on it. So we've defined or redesigned the simulator in such a way that any user anywhere in the world who has ultrasound knowledge can use this platform to be able to make their own textbook and organize their own textbook. But the textbook isn't in a traditional sense, which takes months or years to write. It's a click of a button. I can start hosting a lecture. It's a video textbook. That lecture is automatically classified in a chapter-based manner, and I can reach as many people in the world as possible to be able to subscribe to my textbook. So I'll give an example of this. And I'll pause it along the way because video quality sometimes suffers, but I will go here. I, as an instructor, are you guys able to see my screen? Just want to make sure before I go into the video. Okay. So I, as an instructor, when I launched the simulator, for the first time in the history of Biometrics, you'll have your dedicated user persona. Are you an instructor or a trainee? Because it's the same simulator that you're using for hands-on practice. It's the same simulator that you're using as an instructor to create content. If I'm an instructor, I will actually go in and go to log in as an instructor. When I log in as an instructor, there is going to be a portal that pops up that validates you, meaning that, let me fast forward a little bit. Think of it as me trying to access my Facebook account, my LinkedIn account, or any professional account. You have to validate that who the instructor is. And this is very, very interesting. What ends up happening is if I have one simulator or 300 simulators or 30 simulators as an instructor, I can access any of the lectures that I've ever created anywhere in the world, regardless of what simulator that I created the content on. Because now you have a user account that you're basically testing your information and your content from the cloud. So in this case, the most powerful thing is I can be doing a lecture here in the US. I don't need to ship my simulator. I can just come to Spain, borrow one of your simulators, and my content travels with me. And as you can see, I'm manipulating on the screen. One of the things that we did was, with pandemic, we wanted to introduce remote learning, meaning that because it's on and off social distancing guidelines, we built on-screen controls, how to move the probe upward, inferior, superior, medial, lateral, tilt, rotate, as well as tilt and rock. So you can have 6 degrees of freedom that I can just share my screen. I can give control to anybody anywhere in the world, and with their mouse, they can on this they can, as I'm manipulating the probe and I'm moderating a lecture without my attendees being physically present, I can say, hey Laura, take control and go get me a parasternal long axis view. And she's able to take her control, her mouse with just the internet access and control the entire simulator. In this case, instructors can use a physical probe as well as these on-screen controls, as you see right here, to record lectures. And the lectures that I'll present as a demonstration is, let's say, how to evaluate the apex for effusion in this case. So the first thing I'll do is I will hit, with one click, I can hit record, as you see here in just a moment. As soon as I hit record, these parameters pop up. This is me as writing a textbook, a video textbook, giving it a title, giving it a brief description, what this textbook is about, and do I want, what type of visual presentation that I want? Do I want a secondary camera that's above the system that I've hooked up? Or do I just want my presentation, just as you're seeing my face today, giving you a presentation? Similarly, do I want my webcam on or off, or I can plug in secondary cameras? I can, with drop-down menu, press. My audio is being recorded. I can manipulate this, the size, to make this disappear. And I start giving a lecture, or I'm saving a lecture in the simulator. In this case, I manipulate the probe and I say, okay, the first thing we're going to evaluate is how a subclassical 4-chamber view or subclassical 5-chamber view, and how you manipulate between the two. Then what I say is, okay, we are going to start evaluating the apex of the heart. And it will be a very brief demonstration in this case. And I evaluate, okay, we are looking at fluid right around the apex of the heart, and when we're doing an EFAST exam or a FAST exam. And when you have to, and the beauty of the simulator is that, like I mentioned, the 3D animation. So as I manipulate on-screen probes, I'm able to go ahead and evaluate. But another huge component of the simulator is being able to load pathologies in real time. So if I go in and load a different pathology, in this case, but is a pericardial effusion that there is effusion present or fluid present, what does that look like? So you can showcase both things. In a real-time patient, you won't be able to, the patient either has the pathology or doesn't. In this case, now I can load the same cut plane or the same scanning, and I can showcase, okay, this is what the effusion looks like. And that, for this extent, this is the lecture in terms of chapter 1 that I've written in my visual textbook, and how to evaluate for it. So that's the instructor embedding their knowledge, however extensive they want to get, into the simulator. And once they feel comfortable, what ends up happening is they can stop recording. And once they stop recording, now you can save it and edit it, meaning that you can give an appropriate title. You can even up your own clinical files, meaning that if you have a diagram image from a patient that you've seen in a clinical practice with the real ultrasound images, you can upload those as well. And that will show, I'll actually live on what we call the digital learning solutions. So I saved this. So,
sorry, Jai, when you share your screen, your Biometic screen, we don't hear you well. Like if the connection was not good with when Biometic is running at the same time. Sorry.
Not a problem. Let me see if I can do this. Yep. Can you still hear me okay?
Maybe it's better now.
Okay. So, actually, were you able to hear that I as an instructor boot up the simulator. And what I end up doing is I'm starting to record a lecture, and I am showcasing how to obtain different views where you can define in your audio being recorded, your video being recorded, and you're able to use all features of the simulator to be able to save as a video file into the simulator. And then a quick recap, and then I'll pick up right where I started. In this case, I was giving a demonstration on how to evaluate for pericardial effusion in for a fast model if there's any fluid around the apex of the heart. So this is the lecture that I was doing in demonstration. Once I have saved that lecture, because now I have loaded a different pathology and I can write anywhere on the screen, drop arrows, which my trainees are not there with me. That this is what you want to really evaluate. You want the angle this way of the probe, and this is where the effusion lives. So this is where the pathology lives. And once I feel comfortable, I can now save my lesson. I give it a title or a brief description, but I can also upload my own PDF files, charts, videos, anything that will help you further provide clinical realism to the lesson. You are able to do that. Once I hit save, what ends up happening, and I go back to my account, my online account. So you can access your account directly from the simulator or anywhere on an iPhone or any computer. All of your lessons that you have created, in this case, this is a lesson that I had created, will be available to you. You can categorize this as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 for different topics. So it's very neat for you to, what you would be teaching on site, the lecture that you would be doing next to the simulator, to be able to capture it and reuse it, share it with other colleagues anywhere in the world, and reach trainees, not just locally to your city or your institution, but if you wanted to do global or across the country lessons, you are able to kind of send them, and I'll showcase the next component of what we mean. So that is creating the lectures. The second component is creating the assessment, because the beauty of the simulator and simulation in general is you get to get hands-on practice. And you get to get hands-on practice with real-time feedback from trainees if the instructor and trainees are available at the same time in the same place. So we built features that enable instructors to build end-of-chapter assessments. So chapter 1 was how to evaluate pericardial effusion, as you can see. And now what I will do is I will build what we call end-of-chapter assessment, which is essentially chapter 1 test of how to evaluate pericardial effusion. So as an instructor, I can just a new activity. I can give this a title. So in this case, I'll just call it J demo for you guys for leadership. I can define what mannequin or probe the trainee needs access to, because the instructor is not going to be available when the trainee is practicing this. So what hardware, probe, and the mannequin that the trainee needs to be able to practice this activity. And I can give it a description of what the purpose of this activity is, how to evaluate for pericardial effusion. Because that's what the one that I had written, the video lecture that I had given, this is in relation to that. I can continue. And we give our instructors buckets of different type of activities that they can create. They can just pick at what type. Do you want to do an assessment? Do you want to do something that's simple in terms of just get me a target coupling? Ultrasound is broken into 3 different components. What are those 3 components? How to acquire an image, meaning in terms of where the probe should be in relation to the body to acquire an image. And then the second component is how do you optimize the image, meaning that once I have the probe in the right location, can I optimize my depth gain settings to be able to make that image beautiful so there's nothing else in the way? And then, so that's image acquisition, image optimization, and the third component is extracting data from that image. So if I'm imaging myself or a patient, once I acquire the image, I've optimized the image, Now I have to do measurements and such to be able to extract data from that file, from the ultrasound image. Okay, this is 2.4 centimeters, but somebody of J's size should be normally ABC centimeters. And that's basically the purpose of ultrasound. So we give the instructor the ability to build each of those buckets of exercise. Are you going to do is it somebody new that just needs, is a trainee that you're assessing, are they relatively new? So it's going to be more of around image acquisition. Or is it somebody is intermediate? It's going to be more image optimization in terms of doing, we present them with the questions that give them an image and they have to manipulate the settings to optimize the image. Or is it somebody that's really, that understands ultrasound, but we want to test their clinical theory in terms of, I'm going to give them a full scenario, and I can customize that scenario, and they have to assess where the pathology is. So in this case, the lecture was a little bit more around not just basics of ultrasound, but a little bit more advanced, how to evaluate for fusion near the heart. So I, as an instructor, can go in and basically I want to build a fluid assessment exercise, and I have the ability to just toggle on and embed a pathology in a specific organ. In this case, the pericardium around the heart. Once I hit save, that activity or that end of chapter is automatically saved to my user profile. So I can go back to my profile, and now what you'll see is this is my lecture, and it says video lesson right here. This is my end of chapter, that activity that correlates to the lecture and this activity. Now what would happen is the trainee you can take that and assign it to your entire classroom or anybody in the world. They would get an email link that says, hey, Jay has assigned Sonia how to evaluate for pericardial fusion a video. An email would pop up in Sonia's email, and she would hit the link, and she'd be able to watch the lecture that I've just written, which is my video lecture and how to evaluate it. Then she would schedule time with the simulator, and this is what would happen when she's watched that video. Now this is say, let's say this is Sonia. She's already watched the video, and this would be the thought process. We get a session code. Session code that identifies that I, Jay, have assigned Sonia this lesson, so nobody else can practice that. She takes that session code and puts it into the simulator because you have to practice on the simulator because it's hands-on components. And once Sonia puts that in, the beauty of this platform is instructors, they know the simulator already inside and out, and so do the administrators, and so do folks at the institution. However, trainees are coming and going. They don't have enough time to get familiar with all the features of the simulator. So if I, as an instructor, have assigned Sonia something, her experience is so simplified, it's just gonna go right into the activity that's pertaining to her. So in this case, it's gonna load all the different settings and all the different components which I have assigned to her, so she's gonna practice now. So in this case,
sorry, Jagrup. It happens again that when you are talking and Biometic screen is running, we cannot hear you well. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I'll pause and then okay. I'll talk. We'll go along that line.
Okay, thank you.
So now Sonia has thank you. So Sonia has logged on as a trainee. She's already watched my lecture on the video lecture that I've created. And as soon as Sonia does watch it, I get a confirmation that Sonia has watched the full lecture. And the second email gets sent out, which is basically end of chapter assessment, where she inputs that session code into the simulator. She goes next to the simulator, enters that session code, and this is what she's presented with. So she has a real probe next to her. This is the questionnaire, end of chapter questions that she has to answer. And what I want you to focus on is all of the, what you see is red is the point of interest that she has to scan. This is where potentially the disease or pathology can be found. And these all start out as red. And as Sonia scans, these will turn green, and I will explain why. Because Sonia is doing this at her own time. No instructor is around. She's watched the lecture already. So Sonia begins practicing in terms of the left quadrant and looking for the spleen and the kidney if there's any fluid around there. And as you can see, she picked up a probe and she's scanning these wherever the probe, the angle of attack of probe that's being spliced, they go from red to green. So on the back end, the system is picking up that Sonia actually had enough depth and it did actually orient and physically take a look in that specific segment. So I'll let this play. While she's scanning, she's answering these questions. So she's evaluating for the left upper quadrant. But the instructor has a few other parameters. We can easily put a time limit, right? Sonia only has 2 minutes to do the fast exam. So she has to speed it up. We can toggle that on and off depending on what type of an assessment it is. We can even turn this off completely. And so she only sees it like a clinical representation on an ultrasound machine. So instructor has a lot of autonomy to, as I mentioned, thousands of features to build as many different layers of assessment as possible. So answer, she said no fluid present, goes to the pelvis. And as you can see, scanned about half the pelvis and said no fluid present. Goes to the pericardium and is looking for fluid. But the beauty of the simulator, it's like doing a math problem. If I can easily look to my person's left or right, or if there's multiple people taking an exam, and I can easily write down the answer. 8 is 8, right? 4 plus 4 is 8. But the beauty of the simulator is you can write on screen to show your work, like proof of work, meaning that you actually know what you're looking for. So Sonia can actually go in, drop an arrow and say, okay, this is where the disease is found. Now she's validating that, okay, this is where I'm scanning, and this is where the pathology is actually found as well. From this moment forward, it would just complete her entire exam. And I'll forward ahead so we can save some time. And once completed, give it 1 second. So once completed, what Sonia would see is a quick result, meaning that it took her 1 minute, 38 seconds to complete this assessment after she's watched the lecture at her own time. She did about 77% of the total volume covered. Now, what this means is I, as an instructor, am going to get access to this dashboard because I'm not physically present with her. So I need to be able to still give her feedback. And I can only give feedback to so many trainees. And what about trainees that live very, very far or other parts of the country? I can easily say, okay, Sonia, you did all the answers correctly. I can see that you got the pericardial effusion, there was fluid. So you actually, I know you retained the knowledge of the lecture that I gave. And you scanned fairly well everywhere else. However, I want to see you increase the scanning coverage. So where the visual illustrations come into play, you can say, okay, for the pelvis, you did 76% coverage, but fluid can also be found on the inferior end. And I can see that your ultrasound beam never physically intersected on the inferior end. Therefore, I was actually physically, virtually present in that sense because I know her probe beam did not correlate, did not go all the way down. Sorry, Sonia, to pick on you, but just giving an example. So this enables for the trainee to still get access to in-person data because of the features that we have built. And we believe this level of education where instructor can just embed or download their knowledge into the machine, build those exercises that can be used constantly and repetitively. Trainees can continue to cycle through and use the simulator, and you're able to provide feedback in a very oriented manner. So in this, that's one example of how the simulator is currently being used. And all of these metrics get saved to instructor and learner dashboard. Second component, so I'll pause here for a second and kind of shift topics in terms of other way that the simulator is currently being used for remote education. Any questions? Okay. So I'll share the final component. So another component of the simulator is because we built a virtual probe mode, meaning that if I am next to the simulator and I'm using the physical simulator, I can use a Zoom conference just like this, and I can reach trainees anywhere in the world for an interactive workshop. And what does interactive workshop mean? It's not just a video lecture that you're receiving from me today. I can have the simulator next to me, but if I called on, say, Laura and said, hey, Laura, take control of the simulator and go get me an ABC image, she'll have the full autonomy by just using her mouse to go get me that image. So she has to stay engaged and be able to build that mental capacity on what that instructor is saying, and it becomes very interactive in that sense. So in this case, I have turned the audio off, but I'll give an example. Dr. Deno's on the right-hand side, on the lower right-hand side, we're using Teams. He's in Montreal Heart Institute. Dr. Mitchell is in Vermont. I'm in Seattle. We meet via Zoom. Dr. Deno has the simulator, and I only have my mouse and my screen. He's doing a screen sharing, and he's giving me a lecture. And then after that, he says, Jay, I want you to go move the probe this way, highlight the probe this way, angle it this way. So he's actually almost physically there, because from anywhere in the world, as many trainees as possible can join. He can hand control to different folks. And this enables for us to practice in a very, very efficient manner. So Dr. Deno is basically telling me how to get the hepatic veins of the liver in a single orientation. And once I manipulate the probe, and he's kind of illustrating, do this, do that, and I use my controllers to manipulate and orient my probe to try to get all the hepatic veins in a single plane, as you can see. And he's able to guide me through that. And then I can schedule time in the simulator and practice. So this is what we call remote interactive workshop. The beauty of this, and I'll pause here. I'll stop screen sharing. So the beauty of this is it becomes a very interactive way to learn. And you can reach as many people as possible anywhere around the world. But the main benefit is instructor now has the tools to not constantly be hosting workshops. If they have time, great. But instructors can collaborate with other instructors, build comprehensive lectures, reach as many people around the world as possible. And the primary thing is the efficiency. Remember, we talked about accessibility and affordability of ultrasound. Those were the primary things that have been solved, and why ultrasound is cheap. In relation to other imaging modalities, it's accessible. You can bring it to the patient. But adaptability will only be solved if we utilize a tool like this. So instructors that are writing the guidelines or the knowledge holders can reach as many people as possible around the world using education in this type of a format. Thank you. Any questions?
So thanks, Jagrup, for this amazing talk and the presentation and the new tools that Biomedics can offer us.
Not a problem.
You're here. And now I'm going to introduce the other participants of the roundtable who also will be able to start a nice discussion with you and with all of us. First of all, we have Dr. Xavier Serras. He's a radiologist from Vall Hospital, and he's dedicated to interventional procedures guided by ultrasound, and he is also an associate professor from our university. We also have Dr. Alba Farràs, who is a medical doctor at our hospital as well, and she's specialized in obstetrics and gynecology, and she has dedicated most of her time to obstetrical ultrasound since then. She also have nice questions to make to you. Sonia Núñez, she's your participant and also anesthesiologist in Vall Hospital as well, and she's in the area of trauma, and she's been doing formation for many years, nearly 10 years, and she did some programs and teaching EFAS protocol. And also we have Marina Garcia. She's now coordinator of intensive care unit in Hospital Parc Taulí in a village near Barcelona, and her field of expertise is the respiratory system, ventilation, and she also did several courses of pulmonary echo. So, and now they will start to make some questions to you, and also they can discuss also their experience that they had before with simulation. But if it works for all, I encourage to start this nice discussion. But before this, I wanted to ask you a question, Jagrup. As I told before, I work on cardiology department in a tertiary hospital, and I am also responsible for the simulation program that we will do in echocardiography and that we call EchoCarSim. I belong to a department with a vast experience in teaching, and we've been doing echocardiography courses for more than 40 years, and we receive people from the rest of Spain and also from South America. And although we always try to do a very nice and practical part, we have never been able to do it as broadly as we wanted because of logistical reasons. We just had one simulator before now. Now we have the biomedics, but we had an old one. We just had one simulator, and we had to do like a very short practice, but students, I always felt that students find this part the most appealing. So I think that we really need this time to improve and focus on simulation, because it really improves the knowledge of the students, and they love it, and it's efficient. But despite that, the fact of simulation nowadays is more considered in the basic scenario. As an imaging expert who guides interventional procedures, I wonder if you think that simulators will soon reach the complex scenarios. For example, to train experts in interventional cardiology to do, for example, TAVI implantation, mitral clip, tri-clip implantation, neocord. Perhaps the commercial companies would be very interested on it, and maybe you would collaborate in the development of clinical cases. I don't know your opinion about this, and if you are involved in any one of these complex scenarios.
No, it's a great question. So how do we take ultrasound, which is just an aid for diagnostic tool to be able to understand and diagnose patients, but then use ultrasound as a visual aid when you're doing procedural such as TAVR and implementation and intravenous procedures, etc. It's a really good question. So we are fully aware of that, and I'll answer this in a few segments. We have so much technology today that's available to us. So I believe gone are the days where we focus so much on physical hardware. Physical hardware and tangible hardware will always be available, but there are so many tools which we can utilize to bring realism and bring other features that teach such procedures that you're saying. Augmented reality, virtual reality, and being able to do interactions utilizing these technologies to actually bring a C-arm. So we have a product called Cath Lab, where you can actually, every single instrument that's available for doing a groin placement and doing a TAVR, etc., the sheath, the guide wire, the dilator, all those different components are available. And essentially, it's a software very similar to Vimedix, where you can utilize, insert, and actually do the procedure. And then you have the HoloLens on, where you get the clinical realism of a C-arm. So you can move it and you can actually toggle the C-arm so you can actually see the imaging of the fluoral imaging, etc. So in terms of getting beyond just ultrasound and into all these different procedures that enable that very complicated scenarios to be played out, I believe augmented reality and virtual reality have a huge component to play. Specifically VR, because VR enables you to put on a headset and you each join a clinical room anywhere in the world, right? So you can be joining the same room as I am, and we have all of our catheter kit and the patient and the C-arm and the ultrasound system available right there and then. And you're able to say, okay, Jay, first pick this up, and this is how you manipulate it. Okay, you put the gloves on in this manner. Or you know, maybe this is how you do an anesthetic before you actually do any type of a procedure. There are so many different tools in virtual reality and augmented reality and digital tools that I believe will really accelerate that level of education as well. And
Nice
those
to
are
hear
being worked
this.
on. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm wondering to see all this new stuff.
Awesome.
Okay, maybe the rest of participants, maybe they will make you some questions.
Well, thank you, Jagrup, for your excellent explanation on Biomedics. I'm really happy to be here and to discuss this topic with you all. Nowadays, training in obstetrics and gynecology is done most of the time directly on the patient. We have started to use simulation for team training, for example, in obstetrical emergencies, and we also use simulation to train non-technical skills like communication with patients, and also for some technical skills such as forceps delivery and invasive procedures like amniocentesis and chorionic villus sampling. And now we are going to implement this new simulator to initiate residents to ultrasound examination. And well, I'm really hopeful that it will be a great addition to their training, and we will try to make it the most of it, because I think it has lots of potential. And my first question was, well, the same as Laura, because I was also wondering the possibilities to implement ultrasound guided procedures. In our case, in obstetrics, it will be like amniocentesis and chorionic villus sampling. So, well, you already answered that, no? Probably the VR will be the answer, maybe.
Yeah. So I think there's two components to. So if we talk about virtual reality, it can teach you all the bedside manner, how to interact with instruments. You can have a very clinical environment that looks exactly like your clinical operating room, etc. The patient, there's a lot more that you can do with like changing the patient in terms of size, different complexities, etc. But the hardware will always be important as one component, because I still want to be able to go in and practice my procedure and be able to extract if I'm doing an amniocentesis, and am I getting flashback of fluid. So there is a very fine line between the two, but I believe in terms of digital solutions, whether it's something like Biometrics or something AR or VR or cath lab, and that enable you to actually be able to reach as many trainees. And there are two components to this. What we call is asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. So asynchronous learning is me practicing in my own time with no instructor present. So if I'm able to practice at my own self and get familiar with the procedure, at least get 60-70% proficient, even if I'm not getting the haptic or tactile feedback, because I'm not in a VR or AR scenario, I'm not holding anything tangible or anything of that I can actually, that feels like a needle. But it's amazing how well our hands start behaving and your mind starts perceiving, if you have the VR headset, that you are actually holding a needle because it looks right in front of you. So you can actually learn 60, 70, 80% of the theory, because you know what mistakes can be made, how to actually go in a sequential order. I have to do this before I do this. And then the task trainers and physical hardware will always play an important role, because the first time you do an aspiration, you don't want to do it on a patient. It's good that you know the theory, but you want to at least have some sort of a tactile feedback of, okay, this is how much pressure I need to put. and things of that nature. So having a blend of both and being able to determine which use case is best. If it's somebody completely new, I would put them through a digital course and use digital solutions to build their theory instead of just on boring textbooks. And then the second component is if it's somebody already advanced, they already know the basics, everything, then I'd go right into something a little bit more, which is high fidelity simulation.
Good afternoon, Jagrup. Thank you very much for sharing with us all the possibilities that simulation may have. As Lara was saying, I work in the ICU, so I have a critical care point of view.
Yeah.
And she started talking about it, and I think she's right that what may be interested in, at least in the ICU clinical scenario, is to have a global point of view and to practice how to use the ultrasound in combination with other information in a particular situation, just to answer a few key points or to combine with other aspects. You were talking about all these virtual scenarios, and I think that's very interesting. I think that would be useful. And I would like to ask you, because it's obvious that for the last years we have implemented simulation and we have increasingly used in our courses and everything else. But I have the feeling that we still depend a lot on trainers that are in presence, that we still haven't developed all these distance training procedures. What do you think that may help us to implement these strategies? So what do we need to take this path?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So how do we get from current state to future state, where the current state is everything on site and all the curriculum over the last decades have been built for on-site training? So it's two components. I think companies like ourselves have a huge role to play because technology only becomes accessible and usable if it's easy to use. You can have the greatest car in the world, but if it doesn't have a button push start or something, so for example, traditionally cars use a key, you put it in a key, you turn it on and it starts, right? So companies now come along, you press to start and it's easy to use, easy to scale, right? But if I built a car and I'm gonna get rid of the keys, but if I had built in a 10-digit session code that you input and then it identifies me and then it starts the car, it wouldn't work because it's going to confuse the user. They'd rather just keep the keys, especially if you have in our, there is, especially in the US, I don't know how it is in Spain, but there is a huge influx of most of the clinical educators are a little bit older in age because that's where all the knowledge, they have practiced clinically, they've learned everything and they're a little bit older. So technology takes a little bit longer for it to be adopted in certain different age groups. So any tool that you have to build as a company or as a society or an institution has to be super friendly for all different age groups. iPhone is very, very successful because it's super easy and super intuitive to use that anybody in the world can basically, you click on a button and it opens the application that's of interest. So that's what we wanted to build with Biomedics is forget everything. How do you build it so simple that anybody anywhere in the world can use it and implement it? So I think to answer your question, the primary burden is going to fall on institutions like us or companies like us and whoever. It's not just us or anybody in the world, whichever company that can build very user-friendly tools. So clinicians such as yourself, you have way too much going on, seeing patients, education, and all the other component. And the disadvantage that you have is all the curriculum is for on-site training. So can you very easily see the value of being able to use the new tool to make your life easier going forward? Meaning that in the past, textbook, and I'll give that example, or a peer-reviewed research article to write guidelines. But now you can do, okay, I'm gonna take at least 5-10 minutes to build a lecture, press start, record a video, stop, put it into my LMS and assign it. So if we're able to, it won't happen overnight, but if we're able to, the value of being able to use new technology and implement it so we can start at least laying the foundation one by one, lecture 1, lecture 2, and we can start building a digital catalog of content, which can then be consumed anywhere in the world. And Marina, you can partner with Laura to talk about different specialties on the same lecture that you couldn't do physically if you were doing on-site lectures, right? Logistic issues that Laura mentioned. So it will take time, but I think the primary bottleneck to solve is how friendly it is to use. And as we roll out tools like this, the value proposition where you host one lecture and it's saved forever, for infinite, as long as you want. And whereas if you do a lecture and then next day you have to do the same lecture, 3 weeks later you have to do the same lecture, imagine how much time you're spending. So, well, it's just anything that we start has to take a little bit of time, but the value proposition will outweigh of not doing it. For the societies and institutions and hospitals that utilize the solution, that they will be able to save time in terms of operation costs. Whereas folks that do not will basically be only operation costs, one saving, but the second component is how many people do you want to train? How can you physically training somebody overlooking their shoulder, hey, manipulate the probe this way, and some of those things, you can only give feedback in person to so many people because there's only one of you. But a digital tool where I come in at my own time and I practice your experience, and with a click of a button, you can say, Jay, you missed this part. Then I schedule second time and go do it. It enables a true democracy of being able to have access to you, because you can reach as many people as you want. So I would say that in a long answer, it will take time, but the tools have to be built by companies, which make it attractive for you to use. So you will start building your own foundation. Just like whether it's Twitter, whether it's LinkedIn, the first time you log in, you have nothing. You're just following other people's content. But and that's what I would say healthcare simulation is today. We're following the curriculum guidelines of in-person. But soon as we can start creating an account and building our own following, where I can follow Marina's lecture or Laura's lecture, I think the world is merging into this social media abstract of where we can look at other social philosophical ways of how people are interacting and bring it into healthcare. And that's kind of how, imagine the translation from using TikTok to now using Biometic. It's similar. Few clicks, I can create lectures now. So it's looking at these type of technologies and how we can bring it all together. And I think that's how we will ultimately solve it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jagrup. I also wanted to explain to you and to the rest of the group that Xavier started to do virtual. He's been working on his a virtual simulation, his own virtual simulation, to teach how to do interventional procedures under ultrasonographic guidance for many years, and now his project is finally a reality, and he will present it during this week of simulation. So Xavier, with your new simulation based on virtual reality, do you think that ultrasound phantoms or maybe animal viscera will become a thing of the past, or what do you think about it?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jai, for your explanation. Of course, with our virtual simulator, Winco USG, we don't use ultrasound devices, and we will reduce the use of ultrasonographic phantoms made of polyacrylamide, which are very toxic, not eco-friendly, difficult to manufacture, perishable, and very expensive. We will also reduce the use of animal viscera, which is difficult to manage and perishable too. I'm sure, Alba, that with our project, WINCO-WG is a transversal project, and we will include the possibility to do interventional procedures in this obstetric environment. And I'm sure that we will work together to increase WINCO-WG, I'm sure.
Xavier, do you have any question for Jagrup?
At this moment, no, I'm sorry. Jagrup, thanks a lot for your explanation. I thought that you will stay here in Barcelona this week, but I think that in next time we'll meet.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Thanks a lot, Jai.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Jai. Thank you for your explanation. I'm Sonia. I'm an anesthesiologist in the trauma area. So I've been teaching IFAS protocol and cannulation with ultrasound for many years. And I had the opportunity some years ago to try some simulators, and I was really skeptic about what was going to give to my teaching programs, because we do IFAS program with human models that are the participants of the course, with videos of pathological images, and also exploring the patients in the postoperative area. So I tried the simulators, and I could see that some of the images are quite far from reality and sometimes even confusing. Mm-hmm. So I have two questions, but now you answer one that I was asking you. What do you think that this program can offer to my programs? I mean your simulator, and now I can see that one of the most important things is that they could be auto-evaluating, and they can teach by themselves. They can practice as much as they want. And I think that is great. But I want to ask you if it's possible in the future to get like real images. I was thinking, I don't know about technology, but I don't know if there could be like integrated images from ultrasound that when I use the mannequin, I can see.
Yes. So we break development, it's a really good question, into multiple components. One is education tools. So look at the ultrasound screen. You see the animation on the one side and ultrasound images on the right. All ultrasound simulation that you see in this simulator today is everything hand rendered, meaning that you provide us a pathology. You said, Jay, this would be great in the simulator. And we do our best to use technology to reproduce it using 3D illustration. 100% agreed that in terms of anything that a person can make will not be reproducible via physics, right? In terms of because of how sound waves actually propagate through our body, etc. So to answer that question, we break development into a few components. One bucket of development is building tools for educators. One bucket is to building anatomical realism in terms of make sure all the anatomy. Another is to build archive of different pathologies. But the realism is what you're touching upon. And one of the things that we've invested heavily, and one of the good things about Biomedics is over time, at least 3 to 4 times a year, we update the simulator. So it's like your iPhone. You plug it in at night, it goes to the next version. That's how the Biometic simulator is. Even though it's hardware, the beauty of it is it's a digital solution. There's a laptop, so we can actually push updates. And every 3 to 4 months, there's new content, etc. So what you've touched on is something that we're working heavily on. We have developed it. It's under development to now extract this to a huge library where the clinical realism of what ultrasound images look like is a lot more realistic. So I don't know if you've seen we actually created one case using the new technology. We call it'll be released on middle of May. We call it our 5th generation normal patient 5. So our 5th version of the normal patient 5. And that is a lot more realistic, where you won't be able to tell like, okay, this is an echo image from a patient, of a normal patient. This is an echo image that was a biometric simulation. And I agree, that realism has to be solved. Otherwise, simulation would only go like at this level, whereas clinical practice is this level. So we have to bridge that gap, and we're focusing very, very heavily on. It's a very good point.
Thank you, Jay, because I don't usually do cardiac ultrasound, but as I can check, it was really useful. But lung ultrasound and some pathology of the abdomen, I was trying, and it was really confusing. I could even think, okay, I don't understand really. But yes, I can see the utility about creating programs, like, because I teach my students. But the problem is that they don't continue with the knowledge, because, for example, the fast protocol, if you really do 20 exams, you have like really basic, and the following day you can do it with your patients, and we have a lot of ultrasounds in the area. So that means that but the problem is that they don't do it. So I cannot be behind them all the time. So with the program that you show us now, I can see a really good utility for education. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Jagrup, sorry, Alba, you can continue.
Yeah. No, I only wanted to explain also that in particular, obstetrical ultrasound has many challenges. Probably the main one is that to see a particular plane or structure, there is no fixed place in the belly of the mother that allows you to see that structure, because the best place changes according to the baby's position. So you cannot memorize a hand position because it will be different in each patient. Then another difficulty we experience, and most residents struggle with, is knowing how to find the best sonographic window to see something. For example, when the baby is facing down, it can be tricky to get good images of the heart because the fetal column makes a shadow, and you need to learn how to move the probe in order to get the best quality image. For this reason, even many second and third year residents struggle to get good images in some examinations, and they already have quite a bit of experience using ultrasound. That's why I think ultrasound simulation can have an impact in training, because it can help to build up the coordination and spatial orientation skills that are needed for these examinations. And maybe it could also decrease the time needed to train. This will have to demonstrate that. But and also I wanted to ask something else. Fetal ultrasound has the added difficulty that the baby is constantly moving. So in order to see a particular fetal structure, the position of your hand should quickly adapt to that movement. In this regard, do you think it is feasible to implement fetal movement in an ultrasound simulator? Is that something we can expect to see in the near future, Jay?
Yes, Alba, that's a great point. So currently what we do is, if you go under modalities, under pathologies, you can drop down and go breach different positions, and you can drop down. But what you're asking is, as I'm scanning, it's moving in real time. Yes, we are working on that. I can confidently say, where what we call dynamic movement, just as the heart is beating, the presentation of the fetus in an animated manner, with the correlating ultrasound image behaving the same way, it is something that's under development, and it's the next step of bringing that clinical realism that Sonia mentioned as well. The image quality of a real human, as well as how the human behaves that you find in a real world, in this case a fetus, which actually moves, and it's actually in development.
Okay, that will be great, Jay.
Okay.
Jay, well, I want to ask you this question, and also to the rest of the participants, and maybe to the audience, that this was more technical things, but apart from this, there is evidence that simulation has an impact on educational outcomes. So, but I wanted to ask you if you participated, or you know, or any group that is evaluating the impact in-patient outcomes. For example, evaluative simulation improves the timing of the exams, of the final exam. If the pain of the patients, it's less, it's more, what's the feeling that they perceive? Because these tools are also, all of them, they are amazing. Simulation is amazing for us. We love it, of course. But in a public national system, I'm pretty sure that directors will want results in the near future. So maybe evaluating the final impact on the patient, it would be very nice. Do you know something about this? Do you participate with any group that is doing this kind of evaluation?
So from our end, in terms of, there are a lot of research studies going on with biomedics, which are taking them through even like some accreditation components. How ultrasound in general, so the field that I study, in terms of how simulation actually has some positives when for students who went through the studies that did not use simulation. And primary, the early findings of those studies, I'm happy to share. I'll actually share the links to the studies. The primary findings are the bedside manner, depending on how invasive like if it's OB-GYN, right? Being able to do it in a simulation rather than doing it, just the first time with a patient. So that bedside manner. The second component is how comfortable you are with the probe, because the first time I had the ultrasound system, or I was holding it so tight that my wrist was getting so fatigued. But where you're actually supposed to, and imagine doing that on a real device for so many hours. But whereas in a simulation, very first time, you can actually start learning these subtle nuances where you don't, ultrasound exam can take anywhere from 15 minutes all the way to an hour and a half, depending on what type of study that you're doing. So being able to teach these subtle nuances, which aid in simulation, where you can actually provide feedback without the risk of the patient being there, because the mannequin doesn't talk, in this case. So those type of benefits, I'll share some research studies. We have a lot of research studies, like, for example, Dr. Deneau at Montreal Heart for cardiology, where he's actually using the system in the simulator to incorporate the content of the simulator, like the transgastric images, how to obtain it. Because for new studies, for new clinical studies of the new guidance, it's really hard to build pathologies for using a new way, like a TEE, transgastric abdominal ultrasound. It just won't be, it's not found yet. So you can use a simulator for those components. So in terms of new guidelines using the simulator, as well as the benefits of using the simulator, which aren't really, that don't have to do with clinical theory of ultrasound knowledge, but other components, I'm happy to share the components. So there's a lot of research going on in terms of the benefits of simulation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe the other participants want to ask, or they want to discuss between all of us any other issue. I will see if there is any question of the audience. I think that there is not. I also think that a way to solve the problems that Sonia Núñez had is to make a specific program for echo, for lung echo, for cardiac echo. So we all have the simulators, but what happened in my department is that we had the echo and people just practice with it, but not in a regular way. So they just started doing the different views, but without any pathology. So maybe if we do a program, a well-consolidated program with timetables, with free practice hours, with evaluation, we will probably find a better use of it, Sonia, because just having the simulator and the studies, they can go there 2 hours, 3 hours, very different between each other. So maybe we have a nice evaluation for them at the end of the study. We can incorporate it to the program of the residents. Maybe, in fact, there is a multicentric study which is going on now in France, where several hospitals in France participated on it, and it's checking if a simulation program in transesophageal echo is going to improve the knowledge of the students and to reduce those outcomes that we were discussing. So if it's finally positive, maybe we can incorporate it in the residence programs. Yes, Sonia.
Yes, there's a multidisciplinary group that is just created now to start like a transversal program for residents for abdominal, like fast, lung ultrasound, and some typical questions, no, that about RAS protocols and all that. So that program will be done. So that's the idea. But as I told you, for the moment, anesthesia was doing that. That now will be transversal, so will be better with more different perspectives, knowledge, and will be something with the simulator also. So we are in the way that you have done.
Thank you,
Yes,
Sonia.
I think you're right, Laura. Yeah, Laura and Sonia. I think it's important to set and establish clear objectives and realistic objectives for every step of the learning process, for people not to get frustrated and to know exactly what do they have to get from the learning process with simulation. I think that's crucial, in fact.
There's also a question in the audience. Jorge Pagola, who is a neurologist at our hospital as well. He says, "Congratulations, very interesting simulation initiative." He's a stroke neurologist, and he wants to know if there is any simulation program to teach carotid or transcranial echodoppler. Thank you.
Yes. So in terms of on Biomedics, that's on our roadmap, transcranial Doppler. Jorge, if you can give us your email address, we would love to kind of evaluate this with you, because it's currently in development. So we would love any feedback on the work that we have done. So that would be amazing if you can share your privately. We can get your email address. So that would be great.
Okay, I can give you the contact of Jorge as well.
Certainly.
He just jotted it down now.
Perfect. We'll be in touch.
Okay. Okay, so I think that I don't know in the US, but in Spain the problem is always the same, that we have a limited time, and we need to do clinical attendance in the hospital, and we don't. All the simulation programs at the moment are of our personal time. So we try to do our best, but I'm sure that if we demonstrate and we publish the results and the impact on the clinical practice and on the educational programs, I'm sure that directors of our hospitals will introduce this new way of learning in our daily life in the hospital. Okay, so I don't know if there is any more questions in the audience or of the rest of participants. Okay, Jay, so it was a pleasure to have you here. We hope that in the next edition we have you present here in Barcelona, and we can show you interesting things that we have also here. Thank you very much for your amazing talk.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.